The main index detachment for the Aeldari is gone, and with it goes the tasty reroll that it had, but today we are looking at its spiritual successor in the new codex, which is the Warhost Detachment. Now, the Warhost Detachment is very different from the Index Battle Host, but it does have some familiar strats and enhancements that you may recognise. The main rule, however, is very different, and it ties in closely with your new army rule, which is Battle Focus, and the detachment rule, which is called Martial Grace, brings with it 3 solid abilities. The first part of this rule means that instead of the usual number of Battle Focus tokens you get at the start of the battle round, you instead get +1 to that number. So you'll be getting 3 in an incursion game, 5 in a strike force, and a whopping 7 in an onslaught game, which gives you a load more flexibility in how you want to use your agile maneuvers, and you can definitely have a significant impact on your army if you just need to avoid that particular piece of Overwatch, for instance, but you still want to have a vehicle zooming off an extra d6 +1 inches with their star engines and still being able to shoot. It is maybe not the most flashy of detachment abilities, but it does help you get those extra mobility tricks that you have to go a bit further. You also get some additional bonuses as the next part of the rule, and these are focused on some of the agile maneuvers themselves. The detachment also allows you to add 1 inch to the move characteristic of a unit when it uses the Swift as the Wind agile maneuver, granting you 3 inches instead of 2. So this can propel you to being nearly as fast as other factions' biker units on your regular infantry, and it's going to be a huge benefit if you want to get some charges off or just make it further up the board or get closer and onto a faraway objective. It is just a really nice bonus to have. And then on top of that, you also get +1 to the result whenever you use an agile maneuver that involves rolling a d6. So that is going to be your star engines, your opportunity seized, and your fade back rules. And with those, you will now be getting d6 +2 inches of movement instead of d6 +1. So I will admit they are quite small buffs, quite small implements, but they are potentially very important and really critical. You can get your tanks, for instance, up to a 22-inch movement and still be able to fire. So some combination of these with that extra bonus can be incredibly strong, and just being able to do things like get back into cover more reliably with the d6 +2 inch move instead of d6 +1 can mean the difference between caught out in the open by enemy shooting and being completely out of line of sight. So I wouldn't say it is the strongest of the detachment rules. It certainly doesn't add much to your overall output, but it is, I think, very good, and it can just make your already fast army even more difficult to pin down, and against some factions like some Necron armies and Death Guard and that sort of thing, you really can just run rings around them now and make it so that they can pretty much never catch you if you do want to avoid them. Now, of course, a detachment wouldn't be complete without its choice of enhancements, and the Warhost has got a fairly decent selection of them. They are all on any Asciani model, which is nice, except for the last one, which can only go on a Psyker. But we have the Phoenix Gem up first. This one costs you a mere 10 points, and what it does is your standard return the bearer to the battlefield after they've been destroyed on a 2+. So at the end of the phase where you get destroyed, you can roll a dice, and on a 2+, you bring the bearer back to as close as possible to where they were killed, and they get their full wounds back. So this can be really handy to bring back that key Farseer or Autarch that you wanted to stick around and had a plan for just a little bit longer. You can get them ready to charge back into the enemy if you're going into your turn, or as a last ditch thing, get them to be one final roadblock that your enemy needs to charge in and deal with if you are instead going into the enemy's charge phase. So it is fairly good, I think, for 10 points. It's a nice thing that you can add on and include if you've just got the points left over and nothing else to fill. It can definitely help you to annoy the enemy and get a character that is back when they weren't expecting it, and just maybe help you score a sneaky objective if the enemy thought they had killed you off it. Timeless Strategist is next. This one grants you an extra battle focus token at the start of the battle round if the bearer is on the battlefield or in a transport on the battlefield. This is nice, don't get me wrong. It's maybe less good in this detachment though, because you are already, of course, getting a bonus one, and you are to be honest, unlikely to need 6 tokens each battle round, but this could in theory let you do all of the agile maneuvers in a single round, and if you really did have plans to make use of those agile maneuvers, you could get a lot of benefit from this extra one. I think at 15 points, it's not awful, and if you do have a plan for your agile maneuvers, it really can be useful. I just think the detachment rule does enough for you to make this enhancement not feel like a necessity. Now we move on to the Gift of Foresight. I do really like this one actually. I think it is pretty well priced for 15 points. It allows you to, once per battle round, use the command reroll stratagem for 0 command points on the bearer's unit. Now, of course, a free reroll is always great. I do love the command reroll stratagem, so being able to do it for free every battle round is just honestly really good for 15 points. It can potentially save you 5 whole command points over the course of a game, meaning it's costing you essentially 3 points for a command point, which is fantastic value. I would honestly be trying to fit it in most games if it was me. The only major downside and hard sell for it is that it is only on the bearer's unit, so it can be a bit more limiting than just having a generic free use of the command reroll. But still, I think it is a good enhancement to have in, and most units can take advantage of it in some way. Even if it's just a unit of Guardian Defenders with a weapons platform, they will still love something like a free reroll every battle round just to get some more out of their shooting. So I think this one is very well priced and very worthwhile. Finally, we get on to Psychic Destroyer. This is the priciest one at 30 points, and it gives the bearer, who does have to be a Psyker, +1 damage on their psychic weapons. Now, your psyche units in general aren't the most killy options, but putting this onto something like a Farseer Skyrunner can turn them into a pretty nimble little cruise missile type unit, so it can definitely make them a lot scarier than they initially appear. Things like your Farseers with their Eldritch Storm will now be getting a D6, Strength 6 -2 AP, D3 +1 damage shot, so it is a pricey but potentially fairly strong enhancement to throw onto something like a Farseer. Onto the stratagems next. We have a few that are familiar, as I said, and the first one up is lightning fast reactions. This, like all of the stratagems in this detachment, is 1 command point, and it's done in the enemy shooting or fight phase, and it goes on a non-wraith construct unit from your army, and the enemy is essentially -1 to their hit roll. So it's just a nice, solid, reliable defensive tool to make it harder for the enemy to pick out your units as you are moving up the board or moving into position or holding that important objective. Blitzing Firepower is in your shooting phase. This one allows a unit from your army to gain the sustained hits 1 rule on their weapons if they are shooting at an enemy within 12 inches. But it does get an extra bonus if your weapons already have the sustained hits rule, they get to crit on 5s. So this can turn something like Assaman and the Dire Avenger combo into a fairly scary prospect in this detachment too, because you will be proccing a load more hits with those sustained hits on 5s, and with Assaman's ranged profile as we saw the other day, that can make him very scary. Next up is one we saw before, Skyborn Sanctuary. We saw that in the Aspect Host. This one allows you to re-embark on a transport if you are wholly within 6 inches of it, so it really does let you just zip out of it, shoot into the enemy, and then jump back into the relative safety of a toughness 9 3-up save tank, instead of just letting you stand out in the open to get shot to pieces on your toughness 3 infantry. So it is a really handy and potentially quite sneaky defensive tool as well to just play around with, and you can use it to really damage and then frustrate your opponent when they have a much tougher time trying to deal with the unit that's shooting into them. And talking of frustrating your opponent, we also get Fire and Fade back. This is in your shooting phase just after an infantry unit, but not an aircraft, a wraith construct, or an Assaman unit has shot. That unit can make a d6 +1 inch move. Now, you can't charge after doing this, so you can't move up further up the board and then get a charge off, but you can use it to move, shoot, move, which, as anyone that's played the game for a few editions will know, is a great tool. Tau made great use of it. I think they were one of the first armies to really make use of it. But being able to jump out from cover, shoot into the enemy, and then duck back out of range or out of line of sight to make it incredibly difficult for the enemy to deal with your firepower is just such a brilliant way to frustrate your opponent, get them to make mistakes as they're trying to get in range of you, and just keep your squishy infantry units alive for as long as possible. So I think this is another really good strat, and especially if you don't have a transport nearby for Skyborn Sanctuary, it's another brilliant way to keep a unit safe. Feigned Retreat gives us yet more movement shenanigans for this army. This one is in your movement phase after an Asayani unit has fallen back. You can still shoot and charge with that unit. So even if you are tied up in a combat you don't want to be in, maybe your Fire Dragons or your Dark Reapers are being bogged down by enemy chaff, you can still fall back and then unleash all of your shooting into a nearby target like a tank or something, which is just fantastic. Also, being able to fall back and then bounce from combat to combat on your melee units is really good. It can mean you can keep yourself safe in melee from enemy shooting a lot more easily, and it is just a very handy way to get around the board and get onto objectives and fight in a load of combats very, very easily. So again, this is a super clutch, really good mobility stratagem for this detachment. The final one is Webway Tunnel, which is, you may have guessed it, more movement tricks. This is your standard uppy-downy style stratagem. It's done at the end of the enemy fight phase. You can use it on a unit wholly within 9 inches of a battlefield edge, and they are just put into strategic reserves, so they're ready to come back onto the board in your subsequent turn to grab an objective or get into the enemy backfield and put a scary unit right where your opponent doesn't want them, or just use it to bait an enemy unit out of position and then move your unit from the board and leave that enemy unit high and dry in the middle of nowhere just to get shot to pieces or to have to spend a few turns getting back into position. So there are a good set of stratagems. They are a very strong set of mobility and movement strats, but you also have a couple of nice defensive ones, and then you've got a fairly solid output one from blitzing firepower. Overall, I think this detachment just seems to be one that is going to allow your army to move so fast and be so difficult for your enemy to lock down and tie up. Everything is just going to be zipping around the board faster than pretty much all of your opponent's units, firing into them, ducking back into cover so they can't shoot you. It is just going to be so good for keeping your opponent on their toes, not knowing where you're going to be, and making it so that your squishy units are as durable as possible by making sure that the enemy can't shoot them as much as possible. It's going to be so good for the objective game with your superior speed, I think, and I think that whilst it doesn't have the most direct output bonuses compared to some other detachments, for purely playing that objective game and doing secondaries and that kind of thing, this detachment is one that can do that unbelievably well. And that is the Warhost Detachment. I'd love to know your thoughts on it and how you think it stacks up against the other Aeldari detachments. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me. But until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.